the power of just someone putting words to your experience when you've struggled to do that for a long time is so hard to describe and so meaningful.
Hey everybody, it's Ben. On this episode, we've got Jonah, who was one of the first people I talked to after putting out the word about this podcast, so he's been there since day one, actually before day one. And a really cool feature of this for me is Jonah is a newspaper reporter, which I used to be. And I agree with every word he says on how a job like that can tie in with Tourette Syndrome and just getting to know people in their lives. And like a journalist, he also turns the tables on me and asks me some questions. Notice that he asks me the same question that Melissa C. Water asks me in episode 3. If you could get rid of Tourette Syndrome, if there was a magical cure and you could erase it from your life, would you do it? Or would you go back in time and just eradicate Tourette's from your life? Again, this interview was recorded before any past episode aired, so he hadn't heard that answer yet. This is also before my big announcement to everybody around me, friends, coworkers, that I have Tourette Syndrome, which I was totally closeted about before. So when Jonah and I talked here for this interview, that was still the case. I was still closeted about Tourette's. Again, this is just a couple months ago. I could have edited the whole thing out, but I left it in because I think it bears repeating because this podcast is still growing and reaching new people, and we have a good conversation that we kind of build around that. Speaking of new people, an amazing amount of new listeners over the past couple weeks. Hello to all of you. I'm excited for you to hear this episode. Jonah is eloquent and really just has a great way with words, and surely that's part of his life as a journalist. But it definitely makes for a really great conversation. Oh yeah, and quick note, in a couple spots during this interview, you might hear my dog in the background making some clanking noise. Just like my tics, there's virtually nothing I can do about that. All right, here we go.
So my name is Jonah Balekas. I am a soon-to-be 24-year-old reporter in Janesville, Wisconsin. I'm originally from Oak Park, Illinois, which is about 15 or 20 minutes west of Chicago. So I've just kind of been in the Midwest for pretty much my whole life. I went to school at Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin in Madison. And then after I graduated in 2016 and then moved down to Janesville, which is kind of in between Chicago and Madison, about a month after graduation. And I've been there ever since.
Well, this is kind of personally exciting for me because my background is in journalism, in print and in radio as well, 13 years roughly. The last beat that I had was covering the state legislature, and my background is more in music, but I always loved writing, and it's one of these things where you never stop learning. I mean, it's really, really enriching, and even though it wasn't the success I wanted, my money-making scheme, it was still the kind of thing where I felt really enriched by doing it.
And the best part is that even if you take it take your life in a different direction, it is a really, really good way to just drop into and learn and force yourself to learn about so many different aspects. True. Like I had never learned about, city budgets and school board, policies and going through to all that stuff, especially in the criminal justice system, and just learning how the court system works is, hopefully I don't have to use that for myself in the future, but that is just fascinating information to know. And you're so proximate to such important things in people's lives, and even seeing people in their lowest of the lows, you still are right there kind of watching it happen and unfold. And that just affects you as a person in a lot of ways that can translate into any job, any direction that you choose after it, which is another part of the job that I've always thought was really enriching.
I think a lot of people on the outside who are maybe media consumers don't always see how difficult it's a really, really difficult job to get out and capture something accurately and get people to be open with you and talk with you. And so you can capture something that really does kind of give a 360 picture of what's actually happening. It's not always a thanked position. Sometimes it can be kind of thankless, but especially if you're covering really heavy issues like that.
Yeah. And it's always interesting, I look at that and I think there's got to be some degree of truth to that for for every type of job. I mean, when I think about it, you're absolutely right. When you're in it, you kind of know the little things that make it difficult that not everyone else will see. I think about that too, in the sense of, being the president is a very hard job. Being a mayor is a very hard job. Being a lawyer, being a doctor, and there's probably so much into it that people don't understand. And I think that's absolutely true. That's something that I felt as people, especially in such a field that is widely, consumed and critiqued as the media are. And so that's definitely something that I felt, is I wish people would understand a little bit more. But then I've thought more about how that seems to be like a universal truth. And, it seems like too, with this broader podcast project that you're doing as a whole, when it comes to Tourette syndrome, it seems like that's a really good thing that can come from it, is for people to have a better understanding of what it's like. Because, and from people you've talked to in your own life experience yourself, I've felt like there's a big gap in what people think it is and what life actually is. And you have those moments where you're just like, I really wish people would understand, but I'm not gonna, give you a 5-minute speech and in line for dinner or something like that. So it's a cool part of this project that I think would be helpful for people to understand a little bit more about what it's all like.
Yeah, there is always sort of the pressure to kind of represent what you have in the best way possible and work really hard at awareness and jump at all the chances that arise to educate people about what it is to have Tourette's. But you're right, it is also kind of, it can be awkward if that's, I mean, you could spend all day correcting people and trying to explain to people what it is. Sometimes the terror I've always felt in the whole thing is that if someone does look at me awkwardly or weirdly, or they pick up on a tick that I'm doing, the maybe sliver of a thought that crosses my mind that like I should tell them what I have is really quickly squashed by, it's not worth it. They're not going to get it. That you're going to quickly stigmatize yourself. It's probably just better personal management to, just walk on with your life and grin and bear it. It's obviously not the right way to look at it, but it really is an easy conclusion to jump to when there is so much that you have to explain to really kind of thoroughly inject in their minds what Tourette's is and what it isn't. I mean, that's the bigger part of it. There's the pop culture version of Tourette's, then there's the actual version. I mean, how is that kind of, do you negotiate that with your job? Do people pick up on it? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it comes up for me. I'm very grateful that my form of Tourette's is, I would characterize as pretty mild, I think. And not that there are plenty of noticeable things like that do happen at work. And weirdly enough, one of the public places that my tics do come up the most is at work. I could get more into that, but a lot of it is in private, and it'll be like, I'll be leaving work and I'll get into my car and then I'll make some noises or say some phrases or things like that, or maybe jerk my head as I'm, or kind of wave my arms a little bit as I'm walking to my car. Things that might not look as out of the ordinary if you're just driving by and it's like, oh, someone's just stretching or things like that. But there'll be times when I'm at work, it's weirdly enough that like I'll be on like an interview or something, and I'll like hang up the phone, and then I'll just kind of get this rush, and it feels like the tics come, when there's more, energy or this kind of arousal or this kind of heightened state of being. And I'm able to like kind of like beat my chest a little bit as I get off the phone, or I might say something or kind of jerk my head a little bit, or I'll get up and go get water and kind of stretch my arms and move my neck around and stuff like that. And I've had people kind of ask me about it and be like, oh, did you just beat your chest, or like, you okay over there, or like, what's going on? And I totally feel what you're saying. And there's this kind of gap between like, I know, if we're thinking of a broader educational purpose of let's get more people aware of this, but it's absolutely true on the moment to moment where I feel guilt is maybe not the right word, but you just feel like, do I feel bad for trying to make this a bigger deal than it is? When you're in a group of people and someone makes one of the standard joke about Tourette's just for a affinity for swearing, which people would is I would understand people who get, uncomfortable enough when people make those jokes to want to do something about it. I don't know that it's bothered me as much as it might. Just, I don't know why, but it
Yeah.
doesn't bother me a lot. I notice it and my ears perk up, and I might kind of look down and just not say anything, which isn't great. But for the reasons we talked about, you really want to make a big deal out of it. It's uncomfortable to just be that vulnerable, because this has just been a big part of my life. And
Right.
so I understand, that does come off as kind of awkward and uncomfortable, but is there a broader good that can come from that energy, and I'm sorry, not energy, but that information and that education, where people might be able to learn and be like, oh, like I know someone, and things are always different when you have a personal connection to them. I mean, that's true for so much. So the more people know and recognize that, say, oh, I know someone with Tourette's, because odds are you do, for how prevalent it is.
Right.
You might not realize it, but odds are you've come across people. But it's weird, because I got to tell you, I can't think of a conversation. Like I said, I'm almost 24 years old. I can't think of a conversation, maybe one, of me talking to someone else with Tourette's about Tourette's.
Yeah, yeah, that's the same for me. I'm 37 now. I definitely had connections with other people when I was a kid, but definitely not in my adult life. Maybe the odd interaction on Twitter and that sort of thing, but which is why I consider these conversations that we're having. I mean, this feels like a kind of a valuable moment to me, and it kind of makes me reflect on, I guess, my experiences and just the sort of end goal of feeling a little bit less isolated when it comes to having Tourette's, and knowing what it is in my life, and is the kind of thing like, I know I wouldn't be the same without it, but what does that mean? Is there a goal in trying to manage or eliminate tics? There's no cure, but I mean, it's just what is Tourette's? What is it to me, and how does it relate to other people who also may go through these same situations, but also lead entirely different lives? And I feel like it's kind of important to document. But rewinding, I mean, when did you learn that you had Tourette syndrome? How old were you?
Well, I knew from a young age, elementary school age, that I had tics, and it started with a lot of things, and Tourette's is just much more common in younger populations, and for some it kind
Hmm.
of goes away at the end of the teenage years or early 20s, and for me it hasn't gone away. Um, but it started, with the heavy blinking, and making sounds with my nose, and kind of scrunching my toes
Hmm.
together, and my toes, and my making my hands into a kind of clenching into a fist, which with my feet and my toes, that was a huge thing, because shoes in elementary school were so uncomfortable. I hated wearing shoes,
Yeah.
because I would just I would feel kind of so constrained, and so I would take my shoes off in class as like a little kid. And there were a couple times where, like, I had a substitute teacher kind of crack a joke about, like, go put your shoes back on, like you're stinking up the class with your feet. And it's just like,
God.
and on the level, and I'm sure they had no idea. Um, but there was like a real reason for me to want to do that, and whether or not that was the, right thing to do. But it wasn't just some kid who wants to, make himself at home and
Yeah.
just, is bored with wearing shoes. But I remember just feeling like embarrassed, and
Mm.
feeling bad about that. And,
Yeah.
and those were some of the earlier memories. I remember really emphasizing when I talked to people as a kid that it was non-contagious. And that was,
Yeah. Oh,
I
yeah.
guess just one of
Definitely.
those little kid things that you really latched onto, and just wanted people to be like, no, I promise it's this disease. It's, calling it, I guess, a disease before
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
your vocabulary would call it a neurological disorder. But, I emphasize that. And, I remember there was one time, I think it was in fourth or fifth grade, and it was one of those, go around and partner up with someone, and then share a fact about yourself, and they'll introduce that to the class. And for some reason, I picked this as the the thing I shared,
Yeah.
and they did it. And the person, as he was kind of saying what the fact was, oh, this is Jonah and he has a non-contagious disease called tics, which is just what I described it as.
Right.
And everyone just started laughing. I have no idea why. I don't think they knew what it was, but it was just like everyone in the room is laughing, and I'm just sitting there
Oh,
like,
man.
And it sounds, I can laugh about it now, and that didn't cause any lasting, lasting shame
I'm
and
glad. Yeah.
embarrassment in my life. But that is just, I know, and I know that there's people out there who have so many of those
Yeah.
moments, more than I do. But that's one that I remember of getting that. And there was this unique. I remember when I didn't know. I referred to it as just tics, but when my mom first told me, like later, like years later, I was like, oh yeah, like that's it's Tourette's. Here's why. Here's this. And there was this relief in getting a label for it, because you just live your life a certain way, and everyone lives their own life. You don't know what the alternative is necessarily. So
Right.
to have that label is just that freeing like explanation for, oh, like that's what it is. Like, and it just feels, it's hard to describe, but it's just when you have a label for it and you can identify the reason for it, or that it is understood and that it is something that other people deal with, and there is a
Exactly. Yeah.
community out there, whether or not you connect with them yet, that does kind of lift a little bit of weight off your shoulders there.
Oh yeah, that's totally true. Just knowing that if something has been identified, it's something that's been studied, and it's been studied probably in multiple people. There's that sense of support out there. Now you just got to find it, or wait for it to come to you, or I mean, when did you have a sense of community? I mean, I know you said that you can't really count times that you did have a conversation with somebody else with Tourette's, but any sort of organizational, it was the Tourette Association when I was a kid. I would go to conferences and things like that. But did you have a sort of a circle or anything like that?
No, nothing at all. And I would, it was actually just, I don't know, months ago, maybe 6 months ago or something like that, that I was just at home and I was just looking at it. I was, kind of wasting time on YouTube, and I came across a video that featured, Adam Liddell, who was on The Voice Australia's version, and it was this news story about him and two other, a boy and a young man who were in Australia, and they connected them, and they had Tourette's, and it was I watched that video, and it was just, it's so hard to describe. When I was right before I left college, I wrote about my experience at Wisconsin as a student who never drank at all, and being at a kind of Big Ten party school. I mean, that was
Yeah.
its own experience, and I wrote that, and I just, like I said, earlier, writing is my creative outlet, and it was a project I really liked working on, and kind of just writing about my experience and my thoughts on that. And I had 100 different people in the next few weeks send me an email, people I'd never met from across the country,
Wow.
thanking me for kind of putting a label to, or kind of putting words to like how they
Yeah.
felt. And
Yeah.
I remember just thinking like, hey, this is like, I'm just talking about my life. I don't understand what's so important about that.
Oh man.
Going back to me watching this video and seeing other people with Tourette's and them describing it the same way that I thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll still watch it, and I'll still tear up a little bit, because it is just so moving to be like, this is someone else understands this.
That's huge. Yeah.
Because so much of it is internal, and so much of it, in my sense, has just been in private, where I'll do these things, and it is lonely and isolating, but it is just to say, the power of just someone putting words to your experience when you've struggled to do that for a long time is so hard to describe and so meaningful, that really helped me think about it more, and eventually get to a point where I was able to find you and the project you're working on. I wouldn't have found that if I didn't have this interest in learning more about it and researching what the resources are and things like that.
What else have you learned as you've been trying to? I mean, have you found other people online? Support communities like that.
I've in terms of watching videos and stuff like that, but I wouldn't say that I've had I haven't had any conversations, but I have thought about my own ways. I've thought and put off time and again, writing something, and I've wanted to
Yeah,
kind
I
of
was going to
put
ask about that.
my feelings and my thoughts and my experiences down into writing, just because that's what I like doing. And that's something that I will do. But this has really been the first opportunity to talk about it, and that's and I've had like private conversations. Like there are some people in my life that know this about me, not many. Um, my immediate family and some close friends here and there, but it really isn't that many people, because it's the type of thing that's, how do you bring it up? I want people to know about me and what's important to me if I'm getting close to someone as a friend.
Hmm.
Um, but I've always struggled with, I mean, this, how do you just bring it out there? Like, hey, by the way, I'm going to tell you this, because then it's like, okay,
Yeah,
thanks
you
for
add all
sharing.
kinds of weight to it. Yeah, it becomes kind of awkward at that point if it feels like you want to tell them, but when's the right on ramp?
So what has been your experience, maybe before this project you started? I mean, what was your experience talking to other people about this, and when it came up, and things like that?
It's been pretty minimal. I mean, I have some close friends who I've told. My fiance I've been with for 7 years. I mean, I told her off the bat. I would off the bat meaning just a few days into it because she picked up on some things, but was really, really
Hmm.
quickly understanding. That hasn't been my experience, say in previous relationships where there wasn't necessarily that quickness to understand it, or and tolerance is such a bad word, but I mean just kind of do you have to do that, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And so you want to express yourself, you want to, but you want to do it in a way where it's not like I'm the walking pamphlet for Tourette's and I'm going to educate you on what it is, and telling our stories is important, that sort of thing. I mean, it's just it comes off so clunky when you have to bring
Hmm.
it up to somebody. And the other opportunity is, like you said earlier, when someone's making a joke about it or making fun of it, or like, hey, I saw this guy with Tourette's the other day. He was, and it's the comic book version of what Tourette's is. Then you're like, and you don't want to make it awkward for everybody around you to say, well, oh, well, actually, I have Tourette's, and even though that's probably the right thing to do,
Hmm.
that's sort of the awareness answer. I think it's just the weird social pressure of not wanting to interrupt the natural flow around me if someone picks up something or sees me ticking, or I usually just kind of let it roll off.
Hmm.
And I'm trying to get better at that. But I don't know, still to this day, I don't really know what the easy way is. I feel like it just has to be this organic kind of like golden doorway to like, okay, no, here's the opportunity I have to talk about it. This is going to make it easy. This person's obviously going to understand because they seem cool, they seem smart, they seem empathetic, or it just has to be this. I feel like it has to be this weird formula of perfect things being aligned to where I will feel comfortable enough to say, here's what I got, here's what I'm doing, here's what this is. And so I've been pretty mute about it. Then I remember my teachers trying to explain on my behalf to the class what I was doing, which kind of added this like level of awkwardness because all of a sudden
Hmm.
I was the special kid with this thing that you had to be aware of. And then meanwhile, I did have behavioral issues. I think part of it was from being misunderstood, but then there's also the ADHD, ADD
Hmm.
component to it, and having difficult, the impulse control part of it, and so in a way, anybody who was observing me maybe felt justified that I was kind of some sort of strange weirdo that you had to kind of put a flag on and monitor, and be on somebody's list because I did weird things in public. I ticked and I had behavioral problems. And I think knowing what road that was taking me down made things increasingly difficult for me because I just felt completely misunderstood. I felt like I didn't have the adequate outlet and I just didn't want to talk to people about it.
And there's that, that makes it, when we talk about things that we feel like are the right way, and then the gap that might exist between how we actually are and how we actually think. There are different, motor or vocal tics to me that I am deeply I'm embarrassed about. It is embarrassing to me. I get scared thinking about, what would happen if people heard that. Out there for a period of time, and sometimes it still comes up where I'll kind of like yelp like it sounds like a dog, or yelp, bark, sound like, make those kind of noises.
Yeah.
And I think about, oh my, I recoil in thinking about other people seeing me doing that, and just that the social anxiety that comes with it. Um, it's and so I would never, if someone, especially, comes up to me and says, I feel embarrassed about my tics, I would say, don't do that. Like, no, you have nothing to be embarrassed about. I understand that.
Right.
But I at the same time, I also completely understand how that's the natural feeling. And so
Absolutely.
it is okay to be vulnerable and to have those feelings, and to say, this is how I feel. And even though I see that it might not be the most productive, and we are imperfect, but it is, I think there is, power in the community where you're able to find other people who say, yes, I understand that, I too feel that. And then taking that and sitting in it and feeling it. And then you can think about, okay, maybe I don't need to be embarrassed, and maybe there is a time when I can explain it to people, and things like that. But it's
Mm-hmm.
it is, embarrassing, and it's hard, when we say about it, it's hard to bring up. I mean, that's part of it too. When it's easier for me, just when someone says, why are you doing that? Why are you like hitting your chest? Like, are you okay? And just say, yep, that's easier. Like,
Yeah.
that is the easier thing to do.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, well, first off, you nailed it, and the vulnerability part of it. I mean, I think that's really important to just to kind of open that door of relation to anybody else who's feeling this kind of thing, because I feel like it is to a degree universal. We all have our talking points, but I mean, when it comes down to really how we process things and how we deal with things, and the baggage that, that's attached to that. I mean, it's so difficult to practice in real time. And I'm definitely not good at it. But have you tried to manage your tics in certain ways? I mean, medication or cognitive exercises or anything like that?
I haven't, and it's something I'm still considering, I guess, as I think more about this. But managing in a broader sense, absolutely, in terms of, kind of getting up from my desk at work, and going to get a drink of water, and if I'm in the hallway, kind of shake out a little bit, or
Yeah.
jerk my neck, I kind of holding it in until I get to a more private place where I can just kind of feel like I can do it without being worried that someone's watching me, or someone's seeing me and thinking, what the hell is he doing?
Yeah.
So managing in that sense, yes, because it is something that I actively try to keep private. It's so interesting when I do tell people and talk about it. I mean, again, when I say that, I'm grateful that it is a mild form, and I can hold it, because I understand that there are people who can't, and that to deal with the more constant people always noticing, is very difficult. And I'm not sure how I would be able to cope with the mental stress that comes with that. But people who, when I tell them that I do have Tourette's, they, a lot of times, they say, I had no idea, I never noticed anything. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
always, it's a weird thing to respond to. I kind of want to be like, yeah, that's intentional, because
Yeah.
I work to keep it from everyone, and it's something that
Absolutely.
I don't want. I would I don't want to just be out there as much as, everything else about you. It's not something that, and not because I don't want to talk about it, but again, we get into the embarrassing parts
Yeah.
of it, and that just
Hmm.
it feels embarrassing. And I thought that made me think of an interesting question that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. I mean, would you, if you could, go back and just say, I can live my life without Tourette's, would you? I mean, is it something that you wish you never had to deal with?
I've thought about that too. And I don't know if I'm fooling myself. I don't know if I'm being sincere, but I feel like I would choose Tourette's, because I felt like it's helped me. Uh, Well, I won't say helped. I feel like it's shaped me creatively. I felt like it's kind of given me a new appreciation in terms of empathy, what other people go through. I I feel like I just default to I'll take the Tourette's if it means I can still be where I am right now. And the awkward stuff I've learned to hide or manage, and whether that's out of shame or what. But just to go back to something else he said, this is a long time ago at this point, but my best friend, we've been friends since high school. I told him at one point, and it was the exact same thing he said to me. It was like, I've never noticed anything. I've never seen you do anything. And it's the exact same answer. It's like, I've gotten really good at hiding it. I've gotten really good at disguising things or working them into the sort of environment around me or playing them off like I'm doing something else. Or, if it's a vocal tick, I can really quickly add a throat clearing to it. Or if it's sort of like a jerking tick, then I can maybe stretch or something just to kind of make it look natural. And I hate having to do that. But but at the same time, I feel like that has been a better in quotes, social solution for me than to, kind of claim it and explain it. But I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel the same way. I mean, I can only answer, I think when I'm thinking about this in the context of, people who have more severe Tourette's who, maybe can't get on a bus without, making, large, observable
Yeah.
motions and things like that, that might change how I feel. But as it stands now, I mean, even with the, maybe the anxiety that comes with it and other, things that kind of run along with Tourette's typically, other maybe even if it's not a full-blown separate disorder such as, OCD or
Yeah.
ADHD, like things like that. But, when it comes to just trouble focusing or maybe some obsessive tendencies, I very much so align with you in that I, I am overall happy with my life and where everything's got me. And I think everything has brought me to this point and made me who I am. And to just kind of wipe away something that has been important to me, whether or not it's hard or whether or not it's been overall bad or good or things that I've just kept from people, it's still so much a part of me. I mean, it's so, how would you, I guess this might be branching off into something a little bit
No, go
different,
for
but
it.
how do you describe it to people? How do you describe when people, because people know what Tourette's is. If you ask them, they might not have the most informed answer,
Yeah.
but they're not haven't like not heard of it. I think there are gaps in understanding of the motor tics and the twitches and things like
Yeah.
that. But how do you describe it to someone, let's say in the context of, you're telling them that about your experiences, how would you describe it?
Yeah, I mean, so there are two forks. One is depending on who it is, I feel like I would have that compulsion to separate myself from the coprolalia piece of it, and I have to say no disrespect at all to anybody who does deal with that because I mean that's a real thing. That's a real thing a lot of people go through, but it is also the thing that pop culture has latched onto when it comes to defining what Tourette's is in movies, in comedy, in any sort of media portrayal too. I mean, even when I think media organizations are well intentioned and really trying to sincerely shed light on what Tourette's is, it's not the mild case that they show. It is the more severe case, and I understand that's important to kind of bring attention and awareness to it, but it also kind of adds something to where and I'm not saying that in comparison, I mean, I have it better if I have to explain what I'm not labored with or what I don't have.
Hmm.
But but there is that maybe sort of decision, do I jump to that and explain that like, well, this isn't that. I say I have Tourette's, but it's not what you think. Just to quickly dispel and diffuse any sort of judgment that they might cast on me that I'm some sort of, you know, disabled person who needs help to function, or if I feel like it's someone who does kind of get it a little bit more, then I think I just describe it as like, it's almost like a reflex or something. Like you don't know you're going to do it, or you can't help but do it. And some people say, it's like a sneeze, or some people say it's like an itch. And I think that's a good way of explaining it. But I think there's probably still a better way to kind of capture the fact that, there's something that I don't even always know that I'm doing. Sometimes my fiance she'll kind of look over at me and, obviously like, not, give me any lip about it or anything like that, because she totally gets it and she's amazing and supportive. But she will kind of like turn to me to see if I realize what I'm doing, if I'm making a series of vocalizations, or if I'm tensing my muscles or jerking my head. I don't always know when I'm doing it, but at the same time, I am always, completely aware that someone else might see me doing something, even if I'm not aware of myself doing it in the moment. So it's, I don't know, it just depends on the situation of, do I need to dispel any sort of weird impression that someone's going to have based on their completely misinformed perception of what I've got. And again, it's nothing I'm really good at. And I'm kind of hoping by having these conversations that maybe I can get a little bit better at it. Diagnosed at age 7, 30 years later, I still don't have any clean answers for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I too kind of think back to the try and get people to connect with it, with the uncontrollable part to it, in the sense that, you can have an itch and not scratch it.
Right. Yeah.
It just sucks.
Mm-hmm.
It sucks. It's unpleasant. It's irritating. And it feels like you're kind of driving up a wall. You can have a sneeze similar in some contexts too, where it's like, sure, you can try and hold it, but you would rather sneeze. Like feels better when you sneeze. And one way I've described it is, being still terrifies me.
Oh,
Sitting
God,
still,
yeah.
or having very precise movements. I can never be a surgeon. I hate blood, but if I didn't, I can still never be a surgeon, because having to just sit there and focus and have very precise motor movements makes everything ratcheted up 10 times worse. And being still, and that's how it comes up too in context of, if I'm dating someone, whether you're, laying down next to them, or you're like sitting next to someone on a couch in such close proximity, where I feel like at some point that it helps bring it up for me, because I'll just like, I can't keep my arm still, and I have to kind of, flex my arm and move my arm. And no, I'm not trying to just flex to impress someone. It's just that I can't, believe me, I'm too skinny to really impress anyone with any muscles. So it is just this, here. I can't help it. And, sitting still, and you're so much more, hyper aware of it when you're sitting with someone, because I'm worried like, oh no, they're noticing me, moving my arms, or just, moving my legs and things like that. Like, oh no, I just have to explain it, because I'm sure that they're just wondering what the hell is going on. In reality, I'll bring it up and they're just like, oh, okay. Like, oh, I didn't know that. That's okay. Like, that's perfectly fine. And there is this, which is a true thing of, for anyone, where you feel like people notice things about you way more than they actually do.
Right.
And whether it's a pimple on your face, or a tick, it is, when they are more subtle, and it's true. I do agree with what you're saying about feeling the need to kind of differentiate the different types of Tourette's, and to say, here's what I deal with. It's not the same as what other people deal with. And it is more in a sense of just trying to paint an honest picture for myself. And it's not meant to put down, or to say, pass any judgments whatsoever on what other people deal with, but just more from a place of, I want you to understand what my experience is. I don't want to distort that. I don't want to, make that into hyperbole about what I deal with. And like we've talked about, or I guess at least for me, that it is a mild form, so it is not such a daily burden that's really forced me into seeing, loads of doctors and looking toward medication and things like that. And so it's describing it that way isn't in a frame, and giving people that what their conception might be, and giving them something to frame it with, is not in a sense of, well, here's this, but it's really different than this. It's just more so like, I want to help you understand it and understand my experience without any judgment whatsoever on, what other people have to deal with. And hopefully that as you get more education, you get a deeper understanding of the nuance and the context of the levels that exist and what different people deal with. And, no one has enough space in their head to have the full context and nuance of what everyone has to deal with on every day. We talked about this with the, people understanding what a journalist
Right.
does. If people don't have space in their head to have that deep of an understanding about what every person does. But hopefully, as more and more times come up that you are able to say, oh, I used to think this about Tourette's, but now I can broaden my understanding. Even if you just come to new situations with that kind of, maybe you can call it it's not a skepticism necessarily, but just an open-mindedness. I'll
Yeah.
say that they're that the experiences are more complex, and you can have that open mind to see that people's experiences may not be what you think, and just brings up the importance of listening and hearing people out. And it's true for how we feel, how I grew up wishing people understood more about Tourette's. And I say that I never talked to anyone about it, and it's not because I didn't want to. I have no problems talking about it. I was so excited to have this opportunity to talk about
Yeah.
it. It's just something that it was just so hard to bring up and just didn't feel comfortable bring up. And it's okay to kind of sit in those complexities of, I'm excited to talk about it, but I'm embarrassed and I'm uncomfortable, and what overcomes what. And it's hard to say. And so it kind of has been defaulting to, I'll just keep to myself for now.
Well, are there any situational triggers or anything like that make your tics act up anymore? I mean, I know you mentioned earlier that when you're on the job, you seem to experience it a bit.
Yeah, it's the biggest thread that I can see connecting everything is this, maybe it's like a arousal in the more like psychological sense of the word, of just like that kind of high energy where I'm like getting excited,
Mm-hmm.
or things like that, or different changing, what I can think of, and I'm still trying to unpack it and understand it better myself, but I'll hang the phone up. I'm having a conversation, I'm interviewing someone for my job, and I'm talking and everything's completely normal. I can say it, and then I hang up, and then it just kind of hits me, and it's like it's been building up, and I can kind of keep it in for a little while, and then I can hang up, and then I can
Yeah.
let it go. And there is, when I get really excited about something, or things like that, whenever there's just like high arousal, and maybe your body's just kind of more amped up a little bit, that it does cause me to just you know think a little bit more, and even just thinking about things that are important to me, things that make me nervous. Whenever your body is not in a state, I mean, there's also one of the big, I guess probably the biggest trigger, now that I think about it, is thinking about it. And
Yeah.
you do have those
Yeah.
moments where you're just kind of on autopilot, and where you have your attention focus on something else. Like if I'm if you're riding a bike, or you're doing something and your focus is somewhere else. And for me, that's not when it comes up, but when I'm laying there, like going to sleep. Going to sleep has always been difficult. I
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
people
Me too.
who can just fall asleep, sitting up, and, on a bus, they can just fall asleep. That is something I can never,
Man,
ever do that.
never once
I
done that.
can never do that because I have to sleep, and it have to sleep in a certain position. So if I'm in like a smaller bed, we have to share a bed with someone for whatever reason, it's hard for me to like actually be able to sleep, because of, I need to be in a certain way, and like clench my fists,
Yeah.
and scrunch my toes.
Hmm.
I mean, things like that. Like I can't, or things that I cannot do, because once you get into that, it kind of spirals out of control almost, and you think like, oh no, I'm uncomfortable. And like, especially in the context of sleeping, the more you think about it more, it starts getting a little bit more out of hand, and you start doing it more, and you start ticking more. And that's the opposite of what you need to fall asleep. I mean, you're just getting more and more riled up about something, and that's the exact opposite of what you need to kind of calm down, slow down, and eventually fall asleep.
Yeah, it's funny for me. I mean, it is the extremes. When I have nothing going on, and I'm never bored. There's always something I'm trying to do. But I mean, if it's a quiet situation, I'm sitting by myself. Maybe I'm waiting on something to happen, waiting on somebody to call, or and also trying to get to sleep. I mean, that's definitely when I'll act up. If I'm doing something where I can kind of like slip into the groove of, if I'm doing something at work, or if I'm editing audio or doing a podcast or something like that, I find that I don't quite tick as much because I feel like my brain is just kind of satisfied. But one thing, and this is kind of like the paradox, is when I was writing on deadline, it would really, really
Mm.
act up. I would head jerk. I would make little vocalizations because of the nerves. I mean, you got an editor who's waiting on you to turn something in. It's got to be good. It's got to be accurate. It's got to be clear. And I always think of the pressures on the outside of who's going to be reading this. What are they going to think? What did I miss? That sort of thing. And it would just kind of inflame me or inflame my tics, and I would just go off. I mean, have you had any experiences like that? Is it similar for you?
Yeah, I do feel that too. Just whenever you put it in a really good way of just the extremes, whether it is the extreme, the other end of just the nothing going on, just laying there, sitting there, like I'm terrified of meditation. I mean, that to me, I have no idea how, and I'm sure I've had family push me to try it because I'm sure it's good for me. But it scares me to just the thought of sitting still is
Yeah.
it just gets my heart rate going, and it just makes my start like scrunching my hands and moving my nose and all everything like that. Um,
And it's funny, I did
I,
another interview for this podcast because I have the same thoughts, and I actually have tried, maybe not necessarily with all my heart, but I have tried a meditation before, and it did not take with me. I was just ready to get up and run around the room. I talked with somebody else though. She's not taking medication. I might be saying this wrong, but she's trying to find different ways, alternative ways to manage her tics, and she's finding
mhm,
success with meditation. Which
mhm.
surprised me because that's just not the direction I could go.
Yeah, it's something that people have brought it up to me, and I have tried it. Um, it hasn't been awful. I think I probably get the anxious side of me kind of builds it up to be something worse than it actually would be.
Hmm.
But it is something that I've tried, and I do see how it could be good for me to be able to still my mind, which is a skill that I am lacking in,
Yeah,
to put it
yeah.
as I guess diplomatically. But yeah, it's that would I don't know. It's something I could push myself to do in the future, but just the whole thought of sitting still, and that's a way I feel like it's easy for people to understand too. When I say that's how I describe it, is there is no sitting still, because sitting still means I know I'm sitting still and I'm thinking about sitting still, which then brings me to be like, oh, this isn't going to happen. And then it just goes from there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, are there any other sort of hobbies or things you enjoy that seem to be therapeutic in any way when it comes to ticking?
That's a good question. Um, it really, I don't know of anything specifically, because I think it just has to come down to the focus and the
Yeah,
attention. And when you can get your mind to just sit and focus on something else, and maybe if you are, if it's something like watching TV, I mean, you can lose focus, and focus has really not been something I've been good at. I mean, it is like get distracted in a lot of things, and like I said, whether I don't think that it is to the levels of some other people who may have diagnosed other disorders from that, but it just does seem like it's hard for me to stay focused on things. But when I can and I'm not thinking about it, it really is like you don't know what's not going on because you're just not paying attention, and then your mind wanders back to it. So I don't know that there's a specific thing that I do. I mean, like you talk about, like, wanting to just kind of get up and run around after meditating, the physical release of
right.
trying to hold in all these motor tics and just getting it out. It's that is true. So, the physical activity can be one way to just get it out in a more healthy way.
I don't know, but we've talked about this in previous interviews I've done so far for the podcast of also trying to find alternatives to your tics, of doing something to kind of substitute out the severity of a tic that you might have that that hits the same spot, so to speak, but isn't isn't quite as noticeable or outward, something you can internalize a little bit more. I have no idea how I would go about doing that. I mean, is that anything that's crossed your minds?
I don't know that there has been such an explicit I'm going to substitute A for B
Yeah.
type of conscious behavior on my part, but I think that ties a lot into what we talked about, masking the tics
Yep.
and trying to make them seem a different way. And whether it is, whether it is, you have the tic and you try and, stand up right after, or if it is like you feel the energy and you feel like your insides are just kind of moving at 1,000 miles an hour and you need to do something, and whatever in that moment makes the most sense. If it is just standing up and going for a walk somewhere, or you just start tapping your desk or tapping your foot, or kicking something, or whatever it is, you maybe make a moment to moment decision of, okay, well, I have all of this energy, right? And again, this is slowing it down
Yeah.
way more than the actual decision process, but I have all this energy right now. What can I do to get rid of it? Well, I need to do something. There is this itch and I need to scratch it. What can I do? Let me run through the options. And again, it is more instantaneous and uncontrollable at times. There are times when you do something and you don't have the time to control it, but there's parts of me that feels that sometimes I am able to, just do some kind of motor activity to just get the energy out, and it's just to get rid of it.
So I mean, we've been going for a while and this might require some reiteration, but what's the biggest thing that you want people to know about Tourette syndrome, whether in general or just your experience with it?
I think I want people to most understand the uncontrollable part of it, and that it is such a reflex. But at the same time, I want people, I think there are people who understand that and can know what that is. But what might be more important for them to understand would just be how we feel about those things. And we talk about the embarrassment and the shame and wanting to hide certain things. And I think that might help people have more sympathy toward it, and to maybe watch the jokes that they make, and to have it walk through their own lives with that understanding of our own vulnerabilities and how it is something I can't control. But what does that really mean? I mean, how do I live with something that I can't control? And what are the ups and downs associated with this? And it's one thing to just know, you can connect with someone in such a different way when you just, I see that person who's just doing that stretch or who is just making that noise. But there is a way you can connect with them when you understand the stress that comes with it, and the embarrassment, and sometimes just the pain, emotional pain, and sometimes physical too, as the example you mentioned as well.
Yeah.
Of sometimes these things do hurt, and if you are kind of hitting yourself, and there are times where it can hurt yourself, I just hope that people would understand that side of it, the toll that kind of takes. I think once you have that, you can understand what they're going through. Maybe if it isn't the perfect, I know exactly what you're going through, but you can have a different appreciation for it because you see the full picture.
Thank you for listening. Thanks to Jonah for being a part of this podcast. I loved this conversation. Thought it was very warm. Again, I loved how he relates sort of being a newspaper reporter to empathy and kind of understanding what different people are going through in their lives, and also how people who don't know what Tourette syndrome is may perceive it based on the information that society has fed them. Jonah, thanks so much. I hope you like the new logo. I'm not sure if it's updated yet on iTunes as I speak, but This sounds so lame to talk about, a new logo. But anyway, it's on Twitter at Tourette's Pod and on the show hosting site, tourettespodcast.libsyn.com. The old logo was really just kind of a placeholder until I could think of something better. But yeah, tourettespodcast.libsyn.com. That's where all the past episodes are. If you're new to the podcast, please listen to the past episodes. You can start with episode 0, which kind of establishes who I am, and then we move right into some really, really great conversations with fellow Touretters, where we just talk and get it out and find how we're different here and there, but mostly insanely similar by way of Tourette Syndrome. And if you don't have Tourette Syndrome, and you just maybe hit play on this episode out of curiosity, that's awesome. This is sort of an organic, natural way of laying out what Tourette Syndrome actually is and what people with it actually go through in their lives, even though it is insanely varied. But the point is, you heard a real conversation between human beings, and that's my favorite form of awareness. Please send me your feedback. One cool way you can do that, nobody's done this yet, but somebody please be the first. If you want to weigh in or respond to something on the podcast or just say hi, record it into a voice memo on your smartphone. So just speak it at your smartphone, record it, email that file to me, and I'll play it on the next episode. The address is tourettespodcast@gmail.com. That's Tourette's with an S. tourettespodcast@gmail.com. Or if you prefer, just type it out and send it over. And let me know whether it's okay to read it or excerpt it on the next episode. I think I'm just about caught up on emails to the show. If I haven't gotten to you yet, if you sent me an email and I haven't replied yet, I promise I will reply. The response to this podcast has been a lot more than I bargained for, which I love. That's great news. But it might take me a couple extra days to get back to you, so email me and we'll talk for sure. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you back here next week, and keep in touch in the meantime. New episode every Friday. This is Ben.